The New Orleans Saints signing of defensive end Chase Young could change their defense, but the asterisk is he's got to be able to stay on the field. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I'm your host, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering your New Orleans Saints as a senior writer and reporter over at Saints News Network. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, I'm going to introduce you to a day two top 100 prospect that you need to remember. We're also going to take a look at whether or not the Saints should still look at addressing the edge rusher position or the defensive end position, however it is you want to look at it, despite the signing of Chase Young in this year's draft. I'll tell you why it might be a good idea. And to kick us all off, we're going to be taking a look at how Chase Young changes the defense, but the caveat is that he's got to be able to be out on the field. And that goes two ways. We're going to break all of that down for you on today's episode. We appreciate you very much for being an everydayer and making us your first listen of the day here on the Locked On Saints podcast. Proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, where you can make every moment more. New customers will get $200 in bonus bets by simply winning any $5 bet as their first bet. That's all you got to do. So head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started today. The New Orleans Saints made the right decision in terms of signing Chase Young, the contract structure, all of those things. But what's the actual impact that Chase Young brings to this team, to this defense, as a newly signed player? Well, I want to break down how it is that he can change the game. But the caveat here is that he's got to be able to be out on the field. Now, when I say that, you might read, you might hear, well, he's got to be healthy. And that is true. That is part of it. However, there is an additional side of it too. The Saints have to make a commitment to him being on the field, which might be harder than it sounds. You've got Cam Jordan, you've got Carl Granderson, you've got other guys that could potentially rotate in, like Tano Passanio, Peyton Turner, Isaiah Foskey, all them. And then now you add Chase Young. And look, there's a chance that you continue to address the position and add more talent at the position as well. And don't forget, you've also got guys from the second level that can rush the passer, like Willie Gay, and of course, Demario Davis, who has earned and matched his career high in sacks with 6.5 in each of the last two seasons. So if you're the New Orleans Saints, you also now have sort of this charge to make sure that he is out on the field when he is healthy. Now, he had his neck procedure. It was expected to be on Thursday. No news about how the surgery went or that the surgery is complete. I assume no news is good news, however, but we will see. But now begins sort of that recovery process. Optimistic expectations expect that the timeline will have him back for training camp. Conservative timeline puts him back at the beginning of week 1, right? At the beginning of the season. So the issue here is that if he's not ready until week 1, he's not going to hit the field that much for the first 4 weeks of the season. And remember, with every one of those games that he's active, that's $470,000 that the New Orleans Saints end up recommitting, right? Solidifying that's already been committed in terms of his per game bonus. So if you are going to pay $470,000 per game, you want him to go out there and take snaps, be available, have an impact. Now, look, I'm going to be in the minority of what I'm about to say here, but I ask you to bear with me. I don't know that Chase Young is a player that can take over a game. It's not an Aaron Donald conversation. It's not a Lawrence Taylor conversation. It's not those guys. I don't think that Chase Young, I don't know if Chase Young, I don't have an opinion on it. I don't know if Chase Young is that guy anymore. But what I do know, or is that guy, but what I do know is that he gives your defense what it needs in order to be able to take over a game as a unit. It's about how his addition impacts the team, not just about how his addition brings him, right? You still have to be able to put the team around him. You still have to be able to cover in the back end. Rush and coverage work perfectly together. All these other things, you definitely need that. So how is it that he potentially changes the game in addition to the work that he's doing with the rest of the defense? Well, He gets to the quarterback quickly. And to me, that is like one of the biggest pieces when it comes to what it is that Chase Young could potentially bring to you. I've talked about on this show before about how the Saints pass rush is typically a pass rush that gets there 5-6 seconds after the ball is snapped. It's speed to power conversion, second, third efforts. It's outlasting the offensive lineman in front of you. What we saw towards the end of this season that ended up benefiting them so much was watching Zach Bond come in and be utilized more as a pass rusher and all those things. And when they did that, all of a sudden he was getting to the quarterback quickly, right? 2.5, 3.5 seconds. That means that the secondary, the back end of the defense, doesn't have to hold up for 5, 6, sometimes 7 seconds, forcing coverage sacks, which we see a lot of here in New Orleans. And what Chase Young does instead is that he gets to that quarterback quickly, which then allows you to be able to really keep an offense off of its toes or on its toes and off of its timing, right? Because of how quickly you can get to the quarterback. So I think that alone is the most important thing. And that might sound like one very simple, very small thing. Well, Ross, what difference is 2.5, 3 seconds in football? It's the world. It's the game. 2 or 3 seconds more to make a decision is everything. 2 or 3 seconds in the real world, right, in your everyday life to make a decision sometimes can have an impact in life or death situations, but on a typical day, right, on a standard Friday, if I need to decide how I want to word this email, I can take an extra 3 seconds. And if I have 3 seconds fewer, I'll probably still make the right decision. We ain't talking about emails. We're talking about football, right? We're talking about people hitting each other. We're talking about people making millions of dollars to make the right decision in a split second over and over and over and over and over again. That's why getting after a quarterback as quickly as possible has a ton of value. And honestly, one of the reasons why I've always been so baffled at the New Orleans Saints' sort of lack of interest in investing in speed rushers. They haven't been shy about investing in athleticism. They haven't been shy about investing in speed, but they've always used those as a complement to the big power conversion guys. Chase Young is speed, right? Speed is key when it comes to Chase Young's game. And so that's the way that I think that he ends up changing your game, is that he implements more speed. He gives you youth too. He's not even sniffing 30 years old yet. So if you end up getting a good enough season from him in 2024 to where you want to bring him back in 2025, then great. And the dead money that ends up being accrued in 2025 no longer matters. And it's only $9 million. So really, who cares in the first place? Maybe $9 million. We'll have to wait and see what kinds of potential credit they get back if he does miss games or anything like that. So we'll see how it all goes. And obviously, there's always going to be the asterisk around Chase Young in terms of getting out on the field and all those other things. But it's on the Saints, too, for making sure that he's recovered, gets back in time, and gets back out on the field for a substantial number of snaps, as opposed to just 20 snaps a game. Now, if he can change the game for you for 20 snaps a game, congratulations, you just hit a home run. Because then you don't have to worry about injury as much. If he can go out there 20, 25 snaps a game and, sniff 8 sacks, cool, great, wonderful. But you want him out there more than that, because that's what gives him the opportunity to add to your defense what your defense needs to be able to take over a game. And so with the 2024 season locked in for Chase Young, it doesn't necessarily guarantee the 2025 season. Even if he has an incredible year in 2024, then becomes the bidding war in the offseason of 2025. For those reasons, it might be wise for the New Orleans Saints to still consider investing in edge rusher in the 2024 NFL draft. But there's other reasons too. Let's break those down as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. BetterHelp Therapy Online has been one of my go-tos since 2020, really, in terms of making sure that I'm getting the mental health support that I need. I do the things that I need to do for my body. I eat well. I go to the gym sometimes and all those other things. But what am I doing to help my brain, my mind, my mental health? Well, that's where BetterHelp has come in. It has been incredibly helpful to me. I've had a lot of big life changes over the course of the past few years, and BetterHelp, therapy, all of that has really helped me to be able to kind of figure all of that out and come out on the right side of it, which has been really helpful. And look, it's still a working journey, right? Every day, you're not just trying to diagnose yourself. You're trying to figure out what's going right in your life and like support the things that you're doing right. And I think that that's one of the things that BetterHelp has been awesome at. So that's just my personal experience with it. But if you've been thinking about trying therapy, give BetterHelp a try. And we're going to help you out with this one. First of all, it's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, suited to your schedule, all of that, super easy. So learn what makes you happy by visiting BetterHelp today. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon for 10% off of your first month. It's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. All right, family. Even though the New Orleans Saints did sign Chase Young here for the 2024 season, I still think it might be wise for them to invest in an edge rusher in the draft. Let's discuss why as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. We appreciate you very much making us your first listen. Don't forget to go and check out the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, Locked On Sports Today, giving you everything you need to know from around the world of sports. Go and check them out today. Locked On Sports Today on YouTube or on the free Amazon TV channels app. So yes, the New Orleans Saints went out and signed Chase Young, but would I be surprised if they still decided to draft an edge rusher in this year's NFL draft? No, not at all. And in fact, I think it's worth consideration. It might be looked at as a waste of resources by the national analysts and all these other things, but you have to really think about what the NFL is in need of these days. You kind of have to have 3 edge rushers in today's game because you're rotating so much. Obviously, you're dealing with injury, age, all these other factors as well. But look at the Miami Dolphins, for instance, right? Jalen Phillips, somebody that they really, really like a ton, who's an effective pass rusher for them. They go out there, they sign Shaq Barrett, who was the franchise leader in a single season, for most sacks in a single season with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He's probably not like as glamorous a pass rusher nowadays as he was, but he is an awesome run stopper. I think they're going to probably look at an edge rusher in the draft. Like, it would make a ton of sense for them at the back of the first round to grab, or later in the first round to grab a Chop Robinson out of Penn State, or, you know, one of these other guys. Like if a Jared Verse falls, keep him in the state of Florida. You know what I mean? Those things absolutely make sense. And I think for the New Orleans Saints, they should be looking to do the same. And in fact, I don't think they should wait around for it either. Like, they can do offensive line at 14, but they might not want to wait around until 45 to make that decision. Like, moving up or something like that should very much still be in the cards if the right, defensive lineman falls, somebody that can rush from the edge, generate pressure, all those other things. Hybrid players, all that, they serve a lot of value. Like, looking for versatility makes a ton of sense. And so I do think that it makes sense to still invest in edge rusher. You don't have to do it early. You can do it later on in the draft and stuff like that. Like, you can find some of these other pass rushers, that Jalen Harrell, for instance, out of Michigan. Like, there's good players that you can find later on. Brennan Jackson out of Washington State University, all of that. Like, he's 6'6", 260 plus pounds, like quintessential New Orleans Saints traffic. Wonderful dude in the locker room, like great culture guy, like all those other things. Like, that's what the New Orleans Saints love, right? That's what they like. So it would make a lot of sense. But one of the reasons why I think that it is a good decision to still invest in the defensive line, because I think defensive interior and edge rusher could still use investment, but being redundant at edge rusher shouldn't be ruled out. One of the reasons why I believe that is because, look, you've got Chase Young right now on effectively potentially a 1-year rental. Now, it's an audacious decision by the New Orleans Saints, isn't it, to say 1-year rental on a player when are they Super Bowl contenders right now? I don't know if you can call them that, right? Like, they got a lot of work to do to get there. But I guess we would have said that about the Houston Texans last year too, and look at the way that we were talking about them by the end of the season. But I'm not going to compare those two things. Those two are not the same. But you understand what I'm saying. Like, it's audacious by New Orleans to be like, yeah, you know what? We're going to go and get this guy. We're going to go and get this player. We're going to go and get this person that impacts his defense, that changes things in the defense and all that. I guess if you got a championship defense, you're in contention to at least make the playoffs, right? And so we'll see what the New Orleans Saints actually turn out to be, but I don't think that you can sort of subscribe yourself, if you're the Saints, to a future with Chase Young, right? I don't know that you can subscribe yourself, if you're the Saints, to Chase Young being the successor to Cam Jordan, because that's not what his contract is. You could plan for that. You could hope that. You can have that in your vision. You can, try your best to make that happen. That can be a goal. However it is that you want to look at it, sure. Like, all of those things could be the case, but are they going to be the case? Maybe not, right? Like, you have to be aware of that. You have to be ready for that. The other thing that I think you have to be ready for is the departure of Cam Jordan in the next 6 years. No, I'm just kidding. But in the next like 2 or 3 years, right? Like you got to be ready for that. And right now, like Cam Jordan had to be more of a run stopper toward the end of the season than a pass rusher because he was dealing with the foot injury. He had the vertebra injuries, things like that too. Vertebra, like all of those types of things that he had going on last year. I was supposed to say vertebrae, sorry, but I said vertebra, and it made me make a joke in my head that I don't think I fully explained, but yet still made here for you. So I guess I hope you enjoyed it. A little peek inside my like little messed up brain here. But you have to be ready for that. And so I think that like, or not you have to be ready for that, but like that's what Cam Jordan's role was towards the end. So if that's going to end up being his role, having another guy that can be the pass rusher. So you've got your Jalen Phillips. So just using Miami as an example, right? You got your Jalen Phillips and Carl Granderson, who's like, you're a pass rusher, like go after the quarterback, go and get him kind of a thing, but is also good against the run. You've got your run stopper in Cam Jordan, although I think that his role will be back to what it was pre-injury by the time that we get to next season. But let's just look at it that way, right? He is one of the better run stoppers in the league at his position. He's one of the better edge defenders in the league at his position, and all that. So I think you look at that. Then you add Chase Young, but then what about next year, right? If Chase Young has a good season, then he goes out, he gets a big contract elsewhere. Not likely that the New Orleans Saints would be willing to overcommit money to him, right? They're very careful about that. So with that being the case, you have to be ready for your next person to come up. Is Peyton Turner going to be that person? Is Isaiah Foskey going to turn out to be that person? Tona Passanio's going into a contract year. You got to be ready, right? And you got to keep taking swings, right? The Saints don't take swings at quarterback. They take swings at defensive end. The Saints fail sometimes at defensive end the way that other teams fail at quarterback. If you really think about it, right? Look at Carolina Panthers right now, but you look at the New York Jets and the swings that they've taken at quarterback, whether draft or otherwise, like Saints have kind of done that, right? The Patriots and the swings that they've taken at quarterback, like the Saints have kind of done that, but they haven't done it at quarterback. They've done it at defensive end. They've done it at edge rusher. They've done it for the position that goes after the quarterback, right? The opposing quarterback and everything. So swing away. You know what I mean? Like you got to be okay with that. Like the draft is a crapshoot, right? I did a show, Locked on NFL today with Tony Wiggins, host of Locked on Jaguars, like one of my favorite people in the entire world. And he was talking about what prospect means, the possibility of something. Whatever the possibility of that person or of that prospect is at the very top, there is an equal yet opposite, right? Some science for you. You don't want my dumb self talking about science. But there is an equal yet opposite, part of that, which is that everything that's as likely at the top is just as likely at the bottom in terms of projections, floor, ceiling, all those other things. And so I don't think that swinging for another edge rusher or swinging for another defensive lineman, however it is that you want to look at it, is a bad idea, even with the contract of Chase Young. And trust me, it'll get dogged nationally. Because they know that like Who Dat Nation gonna say something back. You know what I mean? And so I get that, but it's good team building. It's just good team building at that point. You have to have multiple pass rushers. You can't have one, first of all. And depending upon how quickly things end how quickly like Cam Jordan says, okay, I'm ready to hang him up. And then depending upon what happens with Chase Young, you can't just go into a season with Carl Granderson, right? No slight at Carl Granderson, but like you have to have that guy on the opposite side that makes his job easier. Otherwise, triple team him, double team him, whatever, and then the pass rush is gone. You can't let that happen. I think the other thing you got to be aware of is injuries, right? So yes, swing away when it comes to edge rusher. I think they should still do it. I don't know that you have to do it at 14. I don't think you have to rush to do it there, but I also don't think you have to wait to do it. Do it in the second round, trade back up, like whatever it takes. Do it in the fifth round or trade up into the third, fourth, whatever it is that you want to do. I don't think you got to wait around to do it though. I think you can get it done. All right, coming up next, I'm going to introduce you to a top 100 day 2 prospect that you might not have heard of, but that you need to remember, especially for the New Orleans Saints, going into this year's draft. We're going to break it down as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Say goodbye to all that bracket busting, and trust me, your bracket probably got busted yesterday with Kentucky going down to Oakland, which maybe one person, Bijan Robinson, kind of expected. I think it was like 80-something% of brackets went down. 83+% of brackets went down yesterday. Insane. same. But now you don't have to worry about all that because FanDuel will let you bet on every single game of the tournament. So whether you're betting on the big upset like Oakland, or maybe you're going for the favorite like Kansas, that was a clean block, by the way. Okay. Clean block, Kansas. You didn't deserve that. You can go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers are going to earn $200 in bonus bets by simply winning your first $5 bet. That's all you got to do. Your very first bet, win it, $5 or more, $200 in bonus bets. That's $200 that you can then use on point spreads, money lines, and that you can even bet on who's going to win it all. Just head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started and bet on the tournament until they cut the nets down. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. I'm going to introduce you to a top 100 prospect that you might not have heard about, but that I think you need to remember going into this year's NFL draft, especially when it comes to the New Orleans Saints and how wild they can be in the draft sometimes. We appreciate you very much for being here. Don't forget, we are your team every day. We'll be back with a fresh mock draft Monday. And I'm going to try to work this guy into a mock draft just so you can see kind of like where it falls, what it would take to get him, all those other things on Monday. And of course, if any big breaking news happens over the course of the weekend, we'll be right here with you. Ain't got nothing to worry about. All right, y'all. So I want to introduce you to Kris Abrams-Draine, a nickel cornerback out of Missouri. He is a top 100 prospect that I do think should be on the New Orleans Saints radar. And according to our friend Justin Mello over at the Draft Network, he has already been slated to meet with the Saints, the Patriots, and the Vikings. He spent time at the Senior Bowl as well, meaning that he's already had some contact with the Saints. Also, just because every Senior Bowl participant speaks with every NFL team as well. So with those meetings, I don't think that those are top 30 visits, but those are still meetings with the Saints. Now, remember, the Saints have done some top 30 visits with guys that they've drafted. They do visits with guys that they draft. Just sometimes they draft guys that they never talk to. Marcus Davenport, all that. Like, there have been a couple of guys there, but I think last year, Kendre Miller, or thinking about last year, Kendre Miller, the running back out of TCU, they drafted in the 3rd round. Jordan Howden, the safety out of Minnesota, they drafted in the 5th round. Both those guys were top 30 visits. Now, Abrams-Draine, to my knowledge, is not a top 30 visit, but it is still a meeting with the team. And the reason why I want to put him on your radar is because I think that he's a good fit for New Orleans, but it could be complicated about how he fits in. And there are some things to look at that might make you go, maybe not the build for what the New Orleans Saints are looking for. 40 career pass breakups, as well as 7 interceptions over the course of his career. He is predominantly a slot cornerback. And I do think that the Saints could invest in this position. Now, I know what you're thinking. Well, Ross, they're drafting a cornerback, and everyone's talking about this Marshon Lattimore trade. Are you suggesting that they draft this cornerback and then trade Marshon Lattimore and move Alontae Taylor outside? While it is an option, no, that's not my suggestion. But I do think, again, you have to be ready for your future. Paulson Adebo going into a contract year. If things don't work out with Marshon Lattimore, if the Saints don't trade Marshon Lattimore this offseason and things don't work out in 2024, then maybe you're talking about 2025 moving Alontae Taylor to the outside. You've re-signed Paulson Adebo, and then now you have the opportunity here when it comes to a guy like Kris Abrams-Draine who can step into that slot role for you. He's played it incredibly. He's a solid tackler, which you have to be able to be when it comes to slot corner. We know that's something that the New Orleans Saints love. We just heard Ryan Nielsen talking about it in Jacksonville being a thing that he absolutely needs because you have to have guys that can tackle on the perimeter and at corner. That's a Dennis Allen tenant. Dennis Allen got a whole coaching tree out here all of a sudden. No, I'm just playing. But that's a big focus for the Saints and what it is that they look for on the defensive side ever since Dennis Allen has been in place as a defensive coordinator and as a defensive, contributor / head coach, right? Like defensive contributor as a head coach. My apologies. So him, Joe Woods, Marcus Robertson, all believe in the same tenets. You got to be able to tackle. Got to be able to coverage. He's sticky in coverage. Does that very well. And you got to be able to move, and he moves really fluidly. Now, he is 5'10", 178 pounds. So in the slot, that's fine, right? Because you're typically dealing with smaller slot corners and things like that. But as the big slot gets moved in and everything, and especially across the division with a guy like Drake London, who, in my opinion, is a better wide receiver in the slot than he is on the outside. He's just a little bit more dangerous on the inside than he is. He's not really like a deep route guy, not really an explosive dude and everything like that. And so, him matching up with a Drake London could be kind of challenging. But look, I mean, Alontae Taylor's not the biggest dude either, and they were perfectly comfortable having him in the slot. Bradley Roby, you know what I mean? And look who they brought in for a visit. Vonte Maddox is 5'9", 180 something pounds, maybe sniffing 200. You know what I mean? So like they don't have a full-on prejudice around the idea of a smaller slot corner. But I think that this is a guy that just makes a ton of sense for New Orleans. Like we targeted and we pinpointed Alontae Taylor early in the draft process as somebody that the Saints would be interested in. I thought maybe they would draft him and move him over to safety because of his speed, baseball, like all these other things. But he's turned out to be a fantastic outside corner for you. And then the other thing, and then, so like we pinpointed that. And one of the things that we were looking at was his ability to be able to affect the game, to make plays. And this is a guy that can affect the game and make plays. He has that ball hawk ability. Now he's going to be a top 100 selection. I don't think that you're going to be ready to draft him at 45, but I am here once again asking you to entertain the idea, New Orleans, of trading back from 45. Picking up a 50, picking up an 80. Ain't gonna hurt. So that's one of the things that I'm looking at as one of the possibilities in terms of as a way to be potentially land this player. Now, another way that you end up doing this is that you trade 150 and then you trade a future pick, you trade some future draft capital and move up. But trade back. Have a good time. Let's ball out. You know what I mean? Like let's have a good one. So that's a way that I think that you can end up measuring him up and end up landing him and adding him to your team. Now we know that with this being a defensive-led team, a defensive-led head coach, defensive coordinator is a secondary guy. Your head coach is a secondary guy. Your defensive backs coach is a secondary guy, but is also a former safety in the NFL and all that. In Marcus Robertson, that defensive back is going to be something that they're constantly looking at, constantly trying to make better, something that they're constantly want to do because they are guys that would believe and feel that the secondary can change the game for you. And we certainly saw that last year. I thought that the secondary for the New Orleans Saints was the strongest unit on its team in 2023. And they still won 9 games. You know what I mean? So yeah, I understand the idea of wanting to continue to build the secondary. Me as a secondary guy as well, completely agree. Build the secondary. Okay. Continue to add offensive skill position talent. Don't get me wrong. But add to that secondary. So Kris Abrams-Draine is just somebody that I wanted to put on your radar, a name that I want you to remember. I'm going to try to work him into a mock draft on Monday and everything and see what we're able to do in terms of making that happen. But I do think that he's a guy that the Saints might be paying attention to, or not might be paying attention to, because it sounds like I'm like covertly reporting. I'm not covertly reporting anything. Okay. I'm scouting a player and I'm telling you he's somebody that I think that the Saints that matches well with the Saints. And so he's somebody that I think the Saints could have on their radar. Let's put it that way. Because I'm not trying to covertly put anything out there. I just think that he's a good fit. And he's a player that I'll be watching on draft night. And I hope that you'll be watching on draft night as well. And that we'll see. We'll see if the New Orleans Saints end up being in on this player the way that I think they should be. Let me put it that way. Kris Abrams-Draine. Make sure you go and check him out of Mizzou. For Locked On Insiders, I'll do a film study on him. I'll show him to you. I'll introduce you to him. We'll do that. I got to get through my Chase Young film study first, but as soon as I'm done with that, we'll jump to this. And then what's the other one that I wanted to do? Oh yeah, Jonathan Abram at the end of the season. Anyway, you don't need to hear this. Sorry, I'm being weird today. All right, appreciate you. And if you're interested in being an insider, text Who Dat to 504-285-7473. You can also hit up joinsubtext.com/LockedOnSaints so you can see those film studies instead of just hearing me like plan them in front of your face. Sorry about that. All right, Kris Abrams-Draine, got to pay attention to. Make sure that you don't forget that going for an edge rusher could still be a possibility for the New Orleans Saints, early, late, whatever it might be. And Chase Young can change the game as long as he's out on the field, or it can help your defense be in situations where they can take over a game, I think, more importantly, especially with being able to get to the quarterback so quickly. All right, coming up next time, Mock Draft Monday. And I appreciate you very much for making us your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget to go and check out Locked On Pelicans. Big news with the Pelicans. Brandon Ingram with the knee injury. If you want the latest on that, Jake Madison's got you covered over at Locked On Pelicans. Appreciate you as always, making Locked On Saints part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. If you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation, I'll holla at you.